I stood at the end of the long, winding driveway, staring at the colonial-style mansion where I'd grown up, watching as the realtor hammered the foreclosure auction sign into the manicured lawn. My parents had no idea I was here. They had no idea that the offshore company that had just won the bidding war for their precious Oak Ridge estate was actually mine. They wouldn't know until tomorrow when I'd walk through those grand double doors, not as their discarded daughter, but as the new owner of everything they'd lost. My name is Victoria Reeves, and from wherever you're watching this video, stay with me, because this isn't a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the people who should love you unconditionally decide you're worthless, and how sometimes the greatest success isn't proving them wrong, but finding your worth without needing their approval at all. The foreclosure auction had been surprisingly quick. 5 minutes of rapid bidding, a flurry of numbers climbing higher and higher, until finally I nodded slightly to my attorney. 1,700,000. Going once, going twice, sold. The pretentious Victorian mansion my father had always declared the symbol of our legacy now belonged to me, the daughter they'd thrown away like garbage 6 years earlier. I wasn't supposed to amount to anything. That's what my father told me on my 18th birthday as he tossed my duffel bag onto the front steps. You're nothing. But a disappointment, Victoria. A waste of our name, our resources, our time. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, lips pressed into that familiar line of disapproval. We've given you every opportunity and you've squandered them all. Some people are just worthless. Worthless. The word had echoed in my head as I stood there in stunned silence, my graduation cap still sitting on my bedroom desk inside. I'd graduated with a 3.8 GPA despite working part-time jobs since sophomore year. I'd been accepted to state college with a partial scholarship. But it wasn't Princeton like my brother. It wasn't law school like my father. It wasn't befitting of a Reeves. That night, I slept in my car parked 3 blocks away, too shocked to cry, too numb to scream. I kept thinking they'd call, that they'd come looking, that this was some elaborate, cruel lesson. By morning, my key fob no longer worked on the gate. My phone plan had been disconnected. My small checking account, the one with both our names that I'd been using since I was 16, had been drained, with just $43.12 remaining. I sat in that car for hours, staring at the bank app on my phone until the screen went black. 6 years. Of babysitting money, birthday checks from grandparents, summer job earnings, all gone. They hadn't just kicked me out. They'd ensured I had nothing to start with, nothing to survive on. They wanted me to fail, to come crawling back, to admit they were right about my worthlessness. I remember the moment something shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic. No tears, no monologue, no cinematic epiphany. Just a quiet, ice-cold clarity washing over me as I started the car engine. If they believed I was worthless, then I had nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous kind. That was 6 years ago. The road from that moment to this one, standing outside their foreclosed mansion with the deed in my attorney's briefcase, wasn't a straight line. It wasn't a montage of determined face shots and inspiring music. It was messy, painful, and at times humiliating. But looking back now, I realized that being kicked out was the most valuable gift they ever gave me. They meant to break me. Instead, they freed me. The first 3 nights after being kicked out, I lived in my car, parked behind the 24-hour gym where I had a cheap membership. I showered there each morning, changed in the locker room, and spent hours at the public library researching scholarships, grants, loans, anything to make college possible without parental support or information. The financial aid office explained I'd need to file as an independent student, which required extensive documentation proving I received no parental support. It's to prevent wealthy parents from gaming the system, the advisor explained, not realizing the bitter irony. On the 4th day, I called the only person I thought might help, Mrs. Chambers, my high school history teacher. She'd always seen something in me that my parents never had. I stood at the payphone outside the library, my voice cracking as I finally let myself break down. I don't know what to do. 2 hours later, I was sitting at her kitchen table while her husband brought me a cup of tea. "You'll stay with us until you figure things out," she said simply, as if taking in an abandoned former student was the most natural thing in the world. "The guest room is small, but it's yours as long as you need it." I stayed with the Chambers for 4 months. They helped me navigate the Byzantine financial aid system, co-signed for my student loans, and drove me to campus when classes started in September. Mrs. Chambers, "Call me Diana, for heaven's sake, you're not my student anymore," even helped me find a work-study position in the university library that paid above minimum wage and let me study during slow periods. That first semester was a blur of exhaustion and adjustment. I took maximum credits, worked 20 hours a week at the library, and picked up weekend shifts at a local coffee shop. I changed my major from English literature, my passion, to business and finance, a pragmatic choice that felt like swallowing medicine. Every decision was calculated, every dollar stretched, every opportunity maximized. I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. I just wasn't sure what yet. My parents never called, not once. I saw my younger brother Ethan only when he secretly met me for coffee during his winter break. "They've basically forbidden anyone from talking about you," he whispered, glancing around the cafe as if our parents might materialize at any moment. "Dad told the family you had a mental breakdown and needed space. Mom redecorated your room into a home office within a week." I nodded, unsurprised, but still feeling the sting. And they all just believed them? No one questioned why a family would abandon their daughter right after graduation? Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable. "You know how it is with them, Vic. Dad makes a declaration, and reality bends to fit it. Most of the relatives are too intimidated to question anything." He slid an envelope across the table. "I saved some money from my summer internship. It's not much, but—" I pushed it back toward him. "Keep it. I'm managing." It wasn't entirely true, but I couldn't take money from my 16-year-old brother. "Just knowing you don't think I'm crazy or worthless means more than cash." He looked around again, then met my eyes directly. "They're the crazy ones, Vic, not you. Never you." He slid the envelope into my bag anyway when he thought I wasn't looking. When I got home that night and opened it, I found $2,000, his entire summer earnings, and a note. "For when you need it most, I believe in you." I cried, for the first time since being thrown out. In my second year of college, I stumbled into my future by accident. A guest lecturer in my economics class, an alumna named Rebecca Lynn, presented on ethical investment strategies for emerging markets. Something about her perspective resonated deeply, and I stayed after class to ask questions. Those questions turned into coffee, which turned into an informal mentorship, which eventually turned into a part-time internship at her boutique investment firm in the city. "You have good instincts," she told me one evening as we reviewed market projections. "And you ask the right questions, not just about profits, but about impact. That's rare in this industry." I worked for Rebecca through the rest of college, soaking up everything she taught me about navigating financial markets, identifying undervalued assets, and building wealth with purpose. When I graduated, summa cum laude, though with no family, in attendance, she offered me a full-time position with profit-sharing options. "I don't want you to just be an employee," she said as we celebrated over dinner. "I want you to learn how to build real wealth, the kind that gives you options, the kind that lets you write your own story." 4 years later, at 26, I'd done exactly that. Working with Rebecca, I'd grown my initial investments into substantial holdings. I'd developed a specialty in distressed real estate assets, properties, in foreclosure or default that could be rehabilitated and either resold or rented for sustainable income. Every deal taught me something new. Every success built my confidence, and every setback made me more resilient. I never looked back at my old life, never drove past the family estate, never tried to reconnect. As far as I was concerned, Victoria, Reeves had died that night on the front steps, and someone stronger had emerged from her ashes, until 3 months ago when an alert popped up on my phone, an automatic notification from the investment algorithm I'd programmed to flag potentially valuable acquisitions in our target areas, foreclosure filing, 478 Oak Ridge Lane, Westfield. My parents' address, my childhood home, the fortress of their pride. I stared at the notification for a long time, feeling nothing at first, then a strange, calm certainty. Maybe this was always where we were heading. They who believed wealth defined worth, and me who had learned that worth comes from within, but could now speak their language of money too. I took a deep breath and called my attorney. It was time to go home. The morning I planned to walk through those double doors as the new owner, I woke before sunrise. Sleep had been elusive, my mind replaying memories I'd spent years burying. The expectations, the criticism, the constant crushing weight of never being enough. A Reeves excels in everything, my father would say at dinner, reviewing our report cards like corporate performance reviews. Anything less than exceptional is unacceptable. I'd watch my brother Ethan squirm beside me, his 98% in calculus somehow a disappointment, while my 92% in English was treated as evidence of fundamental deficiency. Numbers don't lie, Victoria, my father would say, not looking up from his steak. You're simply not applying yourself. What he never acknowledged was that I was working 30 hours a week at the bookstore downtown while maintaining that 92%. He never knew about the nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. finishing papers after closing shifts. Never cared that I was saving for college because, unlike Ethan, I knew they wouldn't pay my way. The family money came with conditions that felt increasingly impossible to meet. Rebecca noticed my distraction when I arrived at her office that morning. She knew about the foreclosure purchase, had helped me structure the deal through one of our investment vehicles, but she didn't know the personal connection. No one did, except my attorney who was bound by confidentiality. Big day for the Oak Ridge property, she remarked, studying my face. You seem tense. Having second thoughts? I shook my head. No second thoughts, just complications. The previous owners? She raised an eyebrow, sipping her coffee. Something you should tell me? I hesitated, then decided Rebecca deserved the truth. She was more than my business partner. She'd become family in a way my blood relatives never had. The previous owners are my parents, the ones who kicked me out at 18. She nearly choked on her coffee. Jesus, Victoria. She set her cup down carefully. And you're just mentioning this now? It's not personal, I said automatically, then caught myself. Okay, that's a lie. It's deeply personal, but it's also a sound investment. The property is undervalued by at least 30%. The location is prime for our rental portfolio. The renovation costs are manageable. I'd rehearsed these facts like a mantra, trying to convince myself this was just business. Rebecca's expression softened. You don't have to justify it to me. I've always told you that wealth building is personal. Money is never just money. It's freedom, security, choices. Sometimes it's justice. She leaned forward. But are you prepared for what happens after you walk through that door? Have you thought about what you actually want from this moment? I stared out her office window at the cityscape below. For 6 years, I've built my life with one guiding principle. Never be dependent on anyone who sees you as worthless. I've created security they can never take away. I've made choices without their permission. I've become someone they can't dismiss. I turned back to her. But there's still this unfinished feeling. Like I've been holding my breath for 6 years, waiting for something. Closure, Rebecca said simply. You're looking for an ending so you can finally begin. I nodded, surprising myself when tears threatened. I thought I'd moved on. I built this whole life without them. I haven't even spoken their names in years. But when I saw that foreclosure notice, I shook my head. It felt like the universe, offering something I didn't know I needed. Rebecca came around her desk and did something rare for her. She hugged me. Then take it. But go in there knowing exactly what you want the outcome to be. Don't leave it to chance. What did I want? The question followed me as I drove to the Oak Ridge estate that afternoon, my attorney Charles in the passenger seat with the paperwork. Revenge had never been my goal. Success was sweeter without their acknowledgement. But something still burned inside me. Not hatred, but an ache for recognition. Not of my achievements or my money, but of what they'd done. The damage they'd caused. The daughter they'd discarded. We pulled up to the security gate, once programmed with my fingerprint, now requiring a code Charles had been provided as the buyer's representative. The gate swung open, revealing the long driveway lined with maple, trees my mother had planted the year I was born. They'd be 24 now, tall and broad, their leaves just starting to turn gold at the edges. I hadn't expected that to hurt, the realization that I'd missed watching them grow. Are you all right? Charles asked as we approached the house, a question so earnest it made me realize I'd been holding my breath. I'm fine, I lied, straightening my blazer. Let's get this over with. The real estate agent waited on the front steps, smiling broadly, as we parked. Mr. Harmon, right on time. I've prepared all the final documents for transfer. The sellers are inside completing their final walkthrough, as we discussed. My heart stuttered. This wasn't part of the plan. The sellers are here? Yes. They wanted one last look before officially handing over the property. I hope that's not a problem? She smiled apologetically at Charles. They've been quite emotional about the sale. Charles glanced at me, silently asking if I wanted to proceed. I nodded slightly. Perhaps this was better, like ripping off a bandage in one quick motion rather than the slow peel I'd planned. No problem at all, Charles replied smoothly. My client is eager to see the property. We followed the agent up the stone steps I'd once skipped down every morning to catch the school bus. Through the double doors with stained glass panels my mother had imported from Italy. Into the foyer with its sweeping staircase where our annual Christmas card photos were staged. Every inch of this house held memories, few of them warm, and then, suddenly, there they were. My father stood in the grand living room, his back to us, staring out the bay window at the grounds beyond. My mother sat on the edge of a packing box, scrolling through her phone. They'd aged, both of them. My father's hair had gone fully gray, his shoulders slightly stooped. My mother looked thinner, her once perfect blowout now shorter, less polished. Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, the agent called. Cheerfully, the buyer's representatives are here for the final walkthrough and key exchange. My father turned, his expression already arranged in the politician's smile he used for business transactions. My mother looked up from her phone with practiced politeness. Both masks shattered the moment they saw me. Victoria? My mother breathed, her phone slipping from her fingers to the marble floor. My father stood frozen, his face draining of color. I stepped forward, extending my hand professionally. Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, I understand you're surprised to see me. I'm here representing Laurel Heights Investments, the company that purchased your property at auction. What kind of sick joke is this? My father finally managed, his voice hoarse. It's not a joke, Charles interjected, pulling documents from his briefcase. Ms. Reeves is the principal investor and owner of Laurel Heights Investments. Everything is perfectly legal and above board. The real estate agent's eyes had gone wide, darting between us as she sensed the undercurrents. You know each other? They're my parents, I said calmly. Or they were, until they decided I wasn't worth the investment anymore. My mother made a strangled sound. My father's face flushed with anger, then calculation. I knew that look. He was already mapping escape routes, damage control strategies, ways to regain the upper hand. Victoria, this is absurd, he started, his tone shifting to the reasonable, slightly condescending one he used when he thought he could manipulate a situation. Whatever game you're playing, this isn't a game, I cut him off. It's business. Your house was in foreclosure. My company specializes in distressed properties. The market determined the price. The bank accepted our offer. It's really quite straightforward. I smiled, thin and professional. I learned about rational markets at Westfield State, not Princeton, but it seems the education was effective nonetheless. My mother had gone very still, her eyes never leaving my face. You bought our home? How? With what money? My money, I replied. Earned, invested, and multiplied over the past 6 years without a cent from either of you. Quite an achievement. For someone you called worthless, wouldn't you say? The real estate agent cleared her throat awkwardly. Perhaps I should give you all a moment. That won't be necessary, I said, not breaking eye contact with my father. This isn't a family reunion. It's a property transfer. Mr. Harmon has the paperwork ready, and I'm sure the Reeves are eager to complete their move. My father's jaw tightened, that familiar twitch that preceded his coldest anger. I don't know what you think you're proving here, Victoria, but this changes nothing. You're right, I agreed, and watched surprise flicker across his face. This changes nothing about the past, nothing about what you did, nothing about who you are. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. But it changes everything about what happens next. You don't have the power anymore. Not over this house, and certainly not over me. My mother stood suddenly, her composure cracking. You can't possibly understand what we've been through. The financial pressure, your father's business troubles. I understand perfectly. I cut her off gently. I understand what it's like to lose everything overnight, to wonder where you'll sleep, to count pennies for meals, to build from nothing when the people who should support you are the ones who pushed you down. I gestured around the grand room. The difference is I never had a mansion to fall back on. Just my own resilience. Something you never valued in me. My father stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Is this what you want? To humiliate us? To take our home out of spite? Does that make you feel powerful, Victoria? I met his gaze steadily. This isn't about power, or spite, or even the house itself. I took a deep breath. This is about showing you, and myself, that your assessment of my worth was wrong. Completely, fundamentally wrong. And now, we all have to live with the consequences of that mistake. For the first time in my life, I saw something I'd never witnessed in my father's eyes before. Uncertainty. Fear. The realization that he'd miscalculated badly, and now stood before the daughter he'd discarded as worthless, who held the deed to everything he'd lost. The silence that filled the grand living room was unlike anything I'd experienced in this house before. Growing up, silence was rare. There was always my father's booming voice issuing commands, my mother's pointed criticisms, the constant pressure to perform, achieve, represent the Reeves name with appropriate distinction. But this silence had weight, substance. It pushed against us all, making the ornate room feel suddenly too small. I think I should step outside, the real estate agent murmured, backing toward the foyer, clearly sensing she'd stumbled into something beyond her professional capacity to manage. That's not necessary, my father said, his voice regaining its authoritative edge. We're nearly finished here. His eyes remained locked on mine, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Victoria and I can discuss family matters another time. Charles, my attorney, cleared his throat. Actually, as the legal representative for Laurel Heights Investments, I need to inform you that there's a timeline for vacating the premises. According to the terms of sale, you have until 5 p.m. today to remove any remaining personal effects. My mother made a small, distressed sound. But that's impossible. We still have furniture, artwork. You've had 3 weeks since the auction, I said evenly. The terms were very clear. We're dealing with a lifetime of possessions, my father snapped, gesturing around the room. This isn't some rental apartment with IKEA furniture. These are valuable antiques, family heirlooms, which you should have removed before now, Charles interjected, his professional demeanor unwavering. Any items remaining after the deadline become property of the new owner. My mother's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Victoria, these are your grandmother's pieces, your great-grandfather's library, your own childhood mementos. Something cold settled in my chest. My childhood mementos? The ones you kept after throwing me out, you mean? Or did those go into the trash along with me? A flush crept up my mother's neck. That's not fair. You have no idea what was happening then. Elizabeth, my father warned, shooting her a look. I knew too well, the one that said she was revealing too much, showing weakness. I think I have some idea, I continued, walking slowly around the room, trailing my fingers over the familiar surfaces. The marble mantelpiece, the heavy velvet drapes, the ornate side table where our keys always went. What was happening was that I wasn't the image you wanted for your perfect family. I wasn't following your prescribed path. I was working at the bookstore instead of joining the country club. I was applying to state schools with financial aid options instead of Ivy Leagues. I was a disappointment, not because I was failing, but because I was succeeding on my own terms. My father's face hardened. You were throwing away every advantage we gave you? Squandering your potential on mediocrity when you could have been exceptional. I laughed, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. That's the most revealing thing you've ever said to me. In your mind, working hard, supporting myself, pursuing education within my means, that was mediocrity. But you know what was exceptional? Ethan failing 3 classes his sophomore year but getting that family donation building at Princeton. Or Mom's brother declaring bankruptcy twice, but still getting bailed out for another business venture. Or your friend Howard's son getting caught with cocaine but avoiding charges because of your connections. That's enough, my father warned. No, I don't think it is. I turned to face him directly. The pattern was always clear, even when I was too young to articulate it. Money and status could forgive any actual failure, but no amount of genuine achievement could overcome the sin of being ordinary. My mother stepped forward, her hands fluttering nervously. We only wanted what was best for you. No, you wanted what looked best to others, I corrected her gently. There's a difference. Memories flooded back as I stood in that room, how my 10th birthday party had been transformed from the sleepover with my 3 best friends that I'd begged for into an elaborate garden event with 30 children I barely knew, because the Hendersons and Whitakers would expect an invitation. How my paintings were removed from the refrigerator because they didn't match the kitchen aesthetic. How my father withdrew his offer to teach me tennis after my first lesson, declaring I lacked natural athleticism, only to spend every weekend coaching Ethan despite his initial struggles. Do you remember my high school graduation? I asked suddenly. My parents exchanged glances. Of course, my mother said carefully. What was my speech about? My father frowned. You didn't give a speech. The valedictorian. I was the salutatorian. I interrupted. Second in my class. I gave a 5-minute speech right before Melissa Chen. It was about resilience and finding strength in unexpected places. I let the silence stretch between us. You don't remember because you were in the lobby taking a business call. Mom was texting the caterer about Ethan's middle school graduation party the following weekend. My mother had the grace to look ashamed. My father merely looked annoyed at being caught in a lapse of memory. Charles cleared his throat again. Perhaps we should focus on the property transfer. No, I want to hear this, I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. I want to know if they see it, the pattern. How I was always worth less. How I always received less. How I was expected to understand, to forgive, to accommodate. My father sighed impatiently. Victoria, every child thinks they've been treated unfairly. It's hardly unusual to feel your sibling received preferential treatment. But we provided. You with everything. Private education, music lessons, summer programs, family vacations. Half of which I was pulled from early because of your work emergencies, I countered. Or did you forget the summer program in New Hampshire you made me leave 2 weeks early because you decided the family needed to attend the Blakely wedding? Or the violin recital you missed because Ethan had a soccer game the same day? Or the college visit weekend you canceled because you got luxury box tickets to the Phillies? We can't be everywhere at once, my mother protested. No, but you could have been present for the important moments, I said. You could have seen me. Actually seen me, instead of measuring me against some impossible standard. My father's patience was visibly thinning. This melodrama is unnecessary, Victoria. If you bought this house to make some kind of point, I bought this house because it was a sound investment at 20% below market value, I interrupted. Your financial mismanagement made it an attractive opportunity. The fact that it gives me the chance to finally speak these truths is just a bonus. Charles looked increasingly uncomfortable, but remained professionally composed. The paperwork is prepared for final signatures. Once completed, the property will officially transfer to Laurel Heights Investments. And as Ms. Reeves noted, any remaining items must be removed by 5 p.m. today. My father's face flushed with anger. This is your idea of revenge? Taking our home. When we're at our lowest point? Revenge would be having your belongings dumped on the lawn, I said quietly. Revenge would be changing the locks while you were at work and disconnecting your phone. Revenge would be draining your bank accounts and leaving you with $43.12 to your name. I met his gaze steadily. Sound familiar? My mother gasped softly. My father's expression flickered, the briefest crack in his armor, a moment of recognition. That was different, he said, his voice lower. You were being rebellious, making poor choices. I was working to pay for college because I knew you wouldn't, I corrected him. I was choosing a practical education I could afford, rather than going into crushing debt for a name-brand degree. I was refusing to follow a path that wasn't mine just to maintain appearances. I shook my head. But you couldn't see that as strength. You could only see it as defiance. My mother stepped forward, her composure starting to crack. Victoria, you have to understand. Your father's business was already struggling then. We couldn't afford— Don't, my father snapped, cutting her off with a glare. But the truth hung in the air between us. They had known even then that their financial house of cards was starting to collapse. The grand lifestyle, the country club memberships, the luxury cars, all of it had been built on increasingly shaky ground. So that's it, I said, realization dawning. You kicked me out because you couldn't afford both of us, and Ethan was the better investment. That's not— my mother began. Stop lying, I said, not harshly, but with quiet certainty. For once in this house, let's speak the truth. You were already in financial trouble 6 years ago. You knew you couldn't maintain appearances much longer. And having a daughter who insisted on working at a bookstore and attending state college was already embarrassing enough. So when I refused to change my plans to suit your image, you took the opportunity to cut costs. My father stood straighter, his business mask slipping back into place. You're oversimplifying a complex situation. I'm seeing it clearly for the first time, I countered. You didn't throw me away because I was worthless. You threw me away because you couldn't afford the upkeep on 2 perfect children, and I was already showing cracks in the facade. The silence that followed felt like a confession. My mother looked away, her eyes filling with tears. My father maintained his rigid posture, but I could see the truth in the way his shoulders tensed, the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Mr. Harmon," I said quietly to Charles, "would you please provide the final paperwork for signatures? I believe we've established enough context for the property transfer." Charles nodded and opened his briefcase on the grand piano, arranging documents in neat stacks. "Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, if you could sign here and here, acknowledging receipt of the final payment and transfer of deed." My father hesitated, then stepped forward mechanically. He scanned the papers quickly, his Harvard law training evident in the way his eyes caught on specific clauses and numbers. Finding no legal escape route, he signed with sharp, angry strokes. My mother followed, her signature shakier, tears now, falling freely down her cheeks. "Congratulations," Charles said to me as he collected the papers. "Oak Ridge Estate is now officially owned by Laurel Heights Investments." I nodded, a strange numbness spreading through me. I'd imagined this moment for weeks, pictured their faces, rehearsed what I might say. But standing here in the reality of it felt different. Not disappointing exactly, but more complex than the simple victory I'd anticipated. "As the new owner," I said, addressing my parents formally, "I'll grant you an extension until noon tomorrow to remove any remaining personal items. After that, the property will be prepared for renovation." My father's eyes narrowed. "Renovation?" "Yes," I replied. "Laurel Heights specializes in transforming single-family properties into multi-unit housing. The zoning variance has already been approved. This house will become 6 affordable apartments for working families and students." I watched the information land, saw the additional layer of loss cross their faces, not just their home, but their legacy. The Reeves mansion would no longer stand as a monument to their status and wealth. It would serve a completely different purpose: practical, accessible, community-oriented, everything they had spent their lives avoiding. My father's face contorted into an expression I'd seen countless times growing up, that peculiar mix of anger and calculation, as if he were simultaneously furious and plotting his next move. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Victoria, turning business decisions into personal vendettas. This martyr complex doesn't suit someone of your background." "Richard," my mother murmured, placing a restraining hand on his arm. He shook her off. "No, Elizabeth. If she wants the truth, let's give it to her." He turned to me, straightening his posture to reclaim the imposing stance that had intimidated me throughout childhood. "Yes, we were facing financial challenges. Yes, we made difficult decisions. But you were never going to succeed in the circles that mattered. You lacked the polish, the ambition, the fundamental understanding of how our world works." His words hung in the air, unchanged from 6 years ago, yet somehow more pathetic now, stripped of their power over me. There was a time when his proclamations about my inadequacies would have crushed me. Now they only revealed his limitations. "I believe we're finished here," Charles interjected, closing his briefcase with a decisive click. "Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, the property transfer is complete. The keys should be left on the entrance table before you depart. As Ms. Reeves has generously extended your removal period until noon tomorrow, I suggest you use that time efficiently." The real estate agent, who had been pretending not to listen while standing awkwardly by the doorway, stepped forward. "I can provide contact information for several emergency moving services if that would be helpful." My father ignored her, his eyes never leaving mine. "You think you've won something here, don't you? Swooping in with your mysterious fortune to claim our house? What exactly do you hope to prove?" "I'm not proving anything," I replied calmly. "I'm closing a chapter and opening the door for something better to take its place." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Victoria, please. This home has been in the family for 3 generations. Your great-grandfather built it. There must be another solution. Perhaps a lease arrangement until we can repurchase. That's not possible. I cut her off, not unkindly. The property will be renovated beginning next month. The permits have already been filed. Renovated into what? My father demanded. Affordable housing units, I repeated. 6 apartments with below-market rents for working families, single parents, and students. The kind of housing that might have helped me when you threw me out with nothing. My father's laugh was cold. So, this is virtue signaling then? Destroying? A historic home to make some misguided political statement? No, I said simply. It's a sound business decision with the added benefit of helping people who actually need it. The property taxes on a single-family mansion this size are unsustainable. The maintenance costs are prohibitive, but divided into multiple units with reasonable rents, the numbers work exceptionally well. It's actually a brilliant investment model Rebecca and I have refined over the past few years. The mention of Rebecca sparked something in my father's expression, a flash of recognition, then calculation. Rebecca Lynn, of Lynn Capital Partners? When I nodded, he continued. I approached her firm 2 years ago seeking investment in my business. She declined. I know, I replied. She was evaluating your proposal when she noticed my name in your company documents. When she realized the connection, she brought the file to me. I allowed myself a small smile. I advised against the investment. My father's face darkened. You sabotaged me. I saved her money, I corrected. Your business model was unsustainable, your financials were misrepresented, and your projected growth was pure fantasy. I didn't need personal animus to recognize a bad investment, though I'll admit, it was satisfying to be the one who made the call. My mother sank onto one of the remaining chairs, her facade crumbling. How did it come to this? How did our daughter become our adversary? I'm not your adversary, I said, surprised to find I meant it. I'm just not your pawn anymore. There's a difference. Charles checked his watch. Ms. Reeves, we have that conference call scheduled in 40 minutes. I nodded, grateful for the exit strategy he'd provided. Thank you for the reminder. I turned back to my parents. I'll have a security team here tomorrow at 12:01 p.m. to begin the property assessment. Anything left behind will either be donated or disposed of, depending on its condition. My father's posture stiffened further. And where exactly are we supposed to go? Have you given any thought to that in your righteous crusade? We've lost everything. For the first time since entering the house, I felt a flicker of genuine emotion. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a complex mix of pity and déjà vu. I understand completely. It's disorienting to lose everything overnight. To wonder where you'll sleep. To suddenly face a future you haven't prepared for. The echo of my own experience hung between us, unmistakable in its intent. My father recognized it too, his eyes narrowing at having his own callousness reflected back at him. I have, actually, given it some thought, I continued, pulling a business card from my jacket pocket and placing it on the marble-topped side. Charles, this is the contact information for an apartment complex on the east side. It's clean, safe, and considerably more affordable than this neighborhood. They have a 2-bedroom unit available immediately. First month's rent has been paid. My mother looked up sharply. You've arranged housing for us? I've provided an option, I clarified. What you do with it is your choice. The deposit expires in 3 days. My father didn't move to take the card. Charity. From our own daughter. Not charity, I replied evenly. Basic human decency. Something you might want to reacquaint yourself with. Charles cleared his throat again, subtly gesturing toward the door. I nodded and turned to leave, but my mother's voice stopped me. What? About Ethan? Have you spoken to him about this? I hesitated, then turned back. Ethan and I have maintained contact over the years, though I asked him not to tell you. He's been staying with me for the past 3 weeks, since he returned from his deployment. My father's expression shifted to genuine shock. Deployment? What are you talking about? The realization that they didn't know, that they had somehow lost track of both their children, struck me as profoundly sad rather than satisfying. Ethan enlisted in the Army after his second year at Princeton, I explained, watching their faces. He's been serving as a combat medic. He was stationed in the Middle East until recently. He's transitioning to civilian life now and preparing to apply to medical school. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. But he told us he was doing an extended study abroad program. We sent money for tuition. I sighed, suddenly tired of the whole painful charade. You might want to ask him about that when you see him. He's planning to come by tomorrow morning to collect some of his old things. I checked my watch. I need to go. The security code will be changed at 12:05 p.m. tomorrow. Please be sure you've removed everything you need by then. As I turned to leave, my father called after me, his voice holding a note I'd never heard before. Something almost like uncertainty. Victoria, the money, your company. How did you really... I paused in the doorway, considering how much to tell them. The years of exhaustion, working multiple jobs while taking full course loads. The nights spent sleeping on Diana Chambers' pull-out couch. The student loans I was still paying off. The lucky break with Rebecca that had changed. Everything. The grinding work of building something from nothing, with no safety net, no connections, no privilege smoothing my path. I worked, I said simply. I learned. I built relationships with people who valued me for my mind and my character, not my pedigree or potential social utility. I took calculated risks. I failed sometimes and got back up. I created value instead of just extracting it. I met my father's gaze directly. Everything you taught me not to do. With that, I walked out of the grand room where I'd spent so many uncomfortable Sunday dinners, past the sweeping staircase where I'd once descended in my prom dress only to find no parents waiting to take photos. They'd gone to Ethan's baseball game, through the imposing front door that had closed behind me 6 years earlier when I was barely an adult with nowhere to go. Charles followed, carrying his briefcase, professional to the end. At the car, he finally allowed himself a small smile. That was intense. Yes, I agreed, sliding into the passenger seat and exhaling slowly. But necessary. As we drove down the winding driveway between the maple trees, I felt a weight lifting. Not dramatically, not completely, but perceptibly. I wasn't naive enough to think this encounter had fixed anything between us. Some damage can't be repaired. Some bridges, once burned, leave only ashes. But I had spoken my truth in the house where truth was always the first casualty. I had reclaimed, not just the physical space, but the narrative itself. For years, they had defined me as the failure, the disappointment, the worthless investment. Today, standing in the ruins of their financial empire, that story had finally crumbled. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Did you see them? How did it go? I typed back. Yes, it's done. They know you're staying with me. I'll tell you everything when I get home. Home. Not the mansion behind me with its cold grandeur and painful memories, but the warm, modest 3-bedroom condo I'd purchased last year. The place where Ethan had shown up 3 weeks ago with his duffel bag and haunted eyes, asking if he could crash until he figured out his next steps. The place where I'd created safety not just for myself, but for him too. They don't know where I've been, he'd confessed that first night, sitting at my kitchen counter. I couldn't tell them I dropped out, couldn't tell them I enlisted. They'd see it as failure, as weakness. Easier to let them believe I was still their Ivy League success story. I'd handed him a cup of tea and said the words I wished someone had said to me years earlier. You don't have to be what they wanted. You only have to be who you are. Now, as Charles navigated the sleek car through the neighborhood gates, I thought about the renovation plans for the mansion. 6 families, would find homes there. Children would run up and down the grand staircase without fear of fingerprints on the banisters. Parents would cook in the subdivided kitchen without measuring their worth by the brand of their appliances. Students would study in spaces designed for comfort rather than status. It wouldn't erase what happened. Nothing could do that. But it would transform something cold and exclusionary into something warm and welcoming. And maybe that was the best form of justice, not punishment, but reformation, not revenge, but renewal. Rebecca had asked what I wanted from this moment. Now I knew. I wanted to replace the old story with a new one. I wanted to build something better from the ruins of what had broken me. I wanted to walk away knowing that the final chapter wasn't about their rejection or my pain, but about transformation. Where to now? Charles asked as we reached the main road. Office, I replied. We have that call with the architects to finalize the renovation plans. I glanced at him. And then I think I'll take Ethan to dinner. He'll want to hear everything. That evening, I sat in my condo's living room, a glass of wine untouched beside me as I recounted the day's events to Ethan. He listened quietly, his military short hair and newly muscled frame making him look so different from the lanky teenager I remembered. Yet his eyes still held that same sensitivity. So they had no idea I enlisted? He asked, shaking his head. Unbelievable. I sent them letters from my APO address. I called them from the base at Christmas. They must have known. Maybe they chose not to know, I suggested gently. Like they chose not to see me working 30 hours a week in high school. It didn't fit their narrative. Ethan ran a hand over his face. I've been living a double life for so long, pretending to be their Princeton golden boy while actually patching up wounds in combat zones. He looked up at me. I kept thinking if I just did something impressive enough, brave enough, they'd finally... He trailed off, then laughed bitterly. God, we're both still trying to earn their approval, aren't we? Even after everything, I reached across the couch and squeezed his hand. Old habits, but we're breaking them, one day at a time. My phone buzzed with a text. I glanced down, surprised to see a number I hadn't saved but instantly recognized. My mother's cell. Can we talk? Just the two of us. Please. I showed the message to Ethan. He raised an eyebrow. Are you going to respond? I'm not sure. I set the phone down. I didn't expect them to reach out so quickly. I thought they'd need time to process, to rebuild their walls. Mom always was the softer one, Ethan mused, when she wasn't completely under Dad's influence. I nodded, remembering rare moments of warmth, a hand smoothing my hair when she thought I was asleep, a secret smile when I'd done particularly well in an English competition, a quiet, "I'm proud of you," whispered once after my father had left the room following a particularly cutting criticism. What are you thinking? Ethan asked. I'm thinking about the summer I got pneumonia. Remember that? I was 15. Ethan nodded. You were so sick. High fever for days. Dad was in Europe on business. Mom was supposed to join him for some important dinner with potential investors, but she stayed with me instead. I traced the rim of my wine glass. He was furious. When he called, I could hear him shouting through the phone about priorities and appearances. But she stayed anyway. Sat beside my bed all night with cool cloths for my forehead. And then he came home early. Ethan continued, his expression darkening. I remember. He barely acknowledged you were sick at all. Just kept talking about the deal he lost because she wasn't there to charm the investor's wife. The next morning, I found her in the guest room, I said quietly. He'd made her sleep there for failing the family. That's the phrase he used. I heard them fighting. Ethan was silent for a moment. I always wondered if she stayed because she genuinely wanted to take care of you, or if she was just too afraid to travel alone, to face those social situations without Dad scripting her every move. Maybe both, I conceded. But it was the Closest thing to real mothering I'd experienced from her. I picked up my phone again, staring at her message. I think I'll meet with her, just to hear what she has to say. Just be careful, Ethan warned. Remember the time you got that art scholarship in junior year? She seemed so supportive until Dad vetoed it because it wasn't prestigious enough. Then suddenly she'd never thought it was right for you either. The memory stung. That scholarship would have sent me to a summer program at RISD, a dream opportunity I'd worked months to achieve. My mother had helped me photograph my portfolio, had seemed genuinely excited when the acceptance came. Then my father decided it wasn't Reeves worthy, and overnight her enthusiasm vanished, replaced by concerns about wasting time on hobbies. I remember, I said. But this feels different. They've lost everything now. The facades are crumbling. Maybe for the first time, there's a chance for something real. Or maybe they just need something from you, Ethan countered, ever the protective brother despite being younger. Housing, money, connections. Possibly, I acknowledged. But I can handle that. I'm not the vulnerable teenager they kicked out anymore. I typed a response. Coffee tomorrow, 9 a.m., the Blue Cup on Lexington. Neutral territory, public, time limited. Her reply came instantly. Thank you. I'll be there. Ethan stretched and yawned. What time are you heading to the house tomorrow? Around 11. The security team arrives at noon, so I want to do a final walkthrough first. I hesitated. You don't have to come if it's too difficult. He shook his head firmly. I need to get some things from my old room. Besides, we face this together now. That's the deal. As he headed off to the guest room, I sat in the quiet living room thinking about the mansion. I'd hated and loved that house in equal measure growing up. Hated the pressure and judgment it represented. Loved the window seat in the library where I'd hide with books for hours. The ancient oak tree perfect for climbing when no one was watching. The small garden corner where my mother once let me plant wildflowers instead of the usual manicured roses. Would converting it really help me close this chapter? Or was I still responding to their rejection, still trying to prove something? My phone buzzed again with another text from my mother. Thank you for the apartment information. We'll be going there tomorrow after we finish at the house. So they'd taken the offer. Something about that surprised me. My father's pride had always seemed insurmountable. Perhaps financial reality had finally humbled him, or perhaps my mother had made the decision herself. I sent back a simple, "You're welcome," and set my phone down. Outside my window, the city lights sparkled against the darkness. 6 years ago, I'd had no idea what my future held, only the cold certainty that I was on my own. Now I had built something solid, not just financial security, but a life with meaning, with relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation and performance. Tomorrow would bring another confrontation, another chance to rewrite the narrative. I wasn't naive enough to expect miracles or tearful reconciliations. Some wounds run too deep for easy healing. But for the first time, I felt ready to face whatever came next, not as the discarded daughter desperate for validation, but as the woman who had discovered her own worth in the aftermath of rejection. The Blue Cup Cafe was already bustling when I arrived at 8:50 the next morning. I chose a table in the corner with a clear view of the door, old habits from years of scanning, rooms for escape routes whenever my father's mood turned volatile. I ordered a cappuccino and waited, watching raindrops race down the window pane beside me. My mother arrived precisely at 9 wide, her punctuality a remnant of my father's insistence that tardiness is disrespect made visible. She looked smaller. Somehow, her designer coat slightly outdated, her typically perfect hair showing hints of gray at the temples. She hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room until our eyes met. The flash of relief on her face surprised me. "Victoria," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, saying nothing. waiting to see what version of my mother had come today. The society matron who'd stood silently by while my father threw me out, or someone new emerging from the ruins of their carefully constructed life. She ordered tea with trembling hands, then sat quietly until the server left. "I don't know where to begin," she finally said. "Why did you text me?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She looked down at her hands, wedding ring still gleaming though everything else had been lost. "I needed to tell you something without your father present." She took a deep breath. "I've been lying to myself for years about what happened the day you left, telling myself it was temporary, that you'd come back once you'd calmed down, that we'd all move past it." "I didn't leave," I corrected her gently. "I was thrown out. There's a difference." She flinched. "Yes, you're right." Her eyes met mine. Directly. "I failed you that day. I failed you most days, if I'm being honest." The blunt acknowledgement caught me off guard. My mother had spent my entire childhood couching harsh realities in palatable euphemisms. Problems were challenges. Poor people were less fortunate. My father's rages were passionate moments. Her sudden directness felt disorienting, like finding a stranger wearing my mother's face. "Why now?" I asked. "Why admit this after 6 years of silence?" "Because everything's gone," she said simply. "The house, the status, the pretense. Without all that, I can finally see clearly what I've lost that actually matters." Her hands wrapped around her teacup as if seeking warmth. "I lost my daughter, and yesterday I discovered I've lost my son too." "You didn't lose us," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. "You sacrificed us. There's a difference there too." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You're right, again. I sacrificed you both on the altar of your father's approval. Ethan physically present but emotionally distant, and you—" She looked up. "You were always stronger. You refused to be sacrificed, so we cast you out instead." The server returned with her tea, creating a momentary pause in our conversation. I watched my mother's hands as she stirred in honey. Hands that had once adjusted my prom dress, checked for fever, applauded at recitals, but had also packed away my childhood without protest when I was declared unworthy. "When did you realize Ethan had enlisted?" I asked when we were alone again. "Last night," she admitted. "After you left, Richard was volatile. He started making calls, trying to leverage connections that no longer exist. I went through some old papers and found military documents Ethan had left in his desk. Letters from his sergeant, a commendation, all while we thought he was studying international finance." She shook her head. "I confronted Richard asking why Ethan would lie to us, why he'd choose something so dangerous instead of the path we'd planned." "And what did he say?" "He said our children were ungrateful disappointments who couldn't appreciate the opportunities they'd been given." She met my eyes directly. That's when something broke in me. Sitting there in our half-packed mansion, surrounded by valuable antiques that couldn't protect us from foreclosure, listening to him condemn the son who'd been risking his life while we were planning charity galas. She straightened her shoulders. "I told him he was wrong. About both of you. I told him you were both extraordinarily successful, not despite rejecting his vision for you, but because of it." I sat back, stunned. In all my childhood memories, I couldn't recall a single instance of my mother directly contradicting my father. "How did he take that?" A bitter smile crossed her face. "Not well. He left to stay with his brother for the night. Said he needed to be around rational people." She sipped her tea. "I spent the night packing alone, thinking about all the ways I failed as a mother." "Why did you let him throw me out?" The question emerged before I could stop it, the wounded teenager inside me finally asking what she'd wanted to know for 6 years. My mother's face crumpled. "Because I was afraid," she whispered. "Not just of him, though that was part of it. I was afraid of what would happen if I chose you over him. I had no skills, no independent means, no identity outside being Richard Reeves's wife. I told myself, you were strong enough to manage without me, that you'd be fine. Her voice broke. It was cowardice, pure and simple. The admission hung between us, raw and honest in a way our family had never allowed. I thought of all the times I'd imagined this conversation, how I'd fantasized about my mother's regret, her apologies, her explanations. None of those imagined scenarios had prepared me for the reality of her sitting across from me, stripped of pretense, finally speaking truths we'd spent a lifetime avoiding. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued when I remained silent. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see you now. Really see you. The incredible, resilient woman you've become. The success you've built. The strength you've always had. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. This was your grandmother's. I took it from the house last night. I want you to have it, regardless of what happens between us. She placed the box on the table between us. I recognized it immediately. My grandmother's antique sapphire ring, the one piece of family jewelry I'd ever truly admired. Not for its monetary value, but because my grandmother had been the only family member who'd encouraged my independence, my creativity, my difference. I remembered how you used to admire it, my mother said softly. How you'd create stories about the women who might have worn it before it came to our family. Your grandmother always said it should be yours someday. I didn't reach for the box. Why are you giving me this now? Because it belongs with someone who understands its true value, she replied. Not as a status symbol or an investment, but as a connection to a woman who lived authentically. She pushed the box closer to me. Whether you want a relationship with me going forward or not, this is yours. No strings attached. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and realized I was seeing something I'd never witnessed before. Elizabeth Reeves without performance, without facade. Just a flawed, frightened woman finally facing the consequences of choices made and unmade over decades. I don't know what happens next, I said honestly. I can't promise forgiveness or reconciliation. There's too much damage. She nodded. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I see my part in that damage clearly now, and I'm deeply sorry. She glanced at her watch. I should go. We still need to finish at the house before noon. As she stood to leave, I finally asked the question that had been hovering since her text the night before. What will you do now? Will you stay with him? Something shifted in her expression, a new resolve I'd never seen before. I don't know. For the first time in 30 years, I'm actually considering what I want, not just what's expected. She adjusted her coat. But first I need to have a real conversation with Ethan, to hear the truth about his life these past years. I nodded. He'll be at the house this morning to get his things. Thank you for telling me. She hesitated, then added. And thank you for the apartment information. Whatever happens with Richard and me, it's good to know there's somewhere to go. After she left, I sat for a long time watching the rain, the velvet box untouched on the table before me. The conversation had left me feeling strangely hollow, like a building after demolition. The old structure's gone, nothing yet built in. Their place. The mansion looked different in the morning light, less imposing, more vulnerable, like a theater set after the audience has gone home. I pulled into the circular driveway behind an unfamiliar pickup truck with a rental company logo on its side. Ethan stood on the front steps talking to a man in work clothes, gesturing toward the truck's bed. Hey, he called when he saw me, his expression a mixture of tension and relief. I hired some help to move the last of their stuff. Mom texted that she's running late. We met for coffee, I explained, climbing the steps to join him. She had a lot to say. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Actual truth? Or the usual Reeves spin? Something new, I think. I glanced at the worker, who was tactfully moving toward the truck to give us privacy. She apologized, admitted she failed us both, said she's reconsidering everything, including her marriage. Ethan's eyes widened. Wow, that's unexpected. Yeah. I looked at the house, taking in the neglected gardens, the peeling trim around the windows. How much more is left inside? Dad took most of his office stuff yesterday. There's furniture. The movers couldn't fit. Some artwork. Mom's personal items. He ran a hand through his cropped hair. And my childhood bedroom, which is exactly as I left it 4 years ago. Like a weird time capsule from when I was still pretending to be who they wanted. We walked inside, the familiar grand foyer now half empty, dust outlines showing where paintings and mirrors had hung for decades. It felt like a ghost house, still holding the echoes of what it had been, but already transitioning into something else. Ethan led me upstairs to his old room. Unlike the rest of the house with its formal, impersonal design, his bedroom had been allowed some personality. Princeton pennants, debate trophies, framed photos of lacrosse teams. The acceptable interests for a Reeves male, carefully cultivated and displayed. "Help me get the important stuff," he said, pulling a duffel bag from his closet. "The rest can go." I watched as he quickly sorted through drawers and shelves, separating his life into piles. Keep, donate, trash. His movements were efficient, clinical, the way he must have packed for deployment. So different from my own frantic exit 6 years earlier, thrown out with nothing but what I could grab in minutes. "Did you keep anything from my room?" I asked suddenly. After I was gone, Ethan paused, then walked to his closet and reached toward the back, pulling out a shoebox. "I snuck in after Dad removed the door to your bedroom, saved what I could, before they converted it to that home office." He handed me the box. Inside were fragments of my past. My journal with the lock broken, a few favorite books, the sketch pad where I'd drawn my secret designs, a mixtape from my first boyfriend, photos of me with friends who'd been deemed unsuitable influences by our parents. "I thought they threw everything away," I whispered, touching the items gently. "I never expected to see any of this again." "Dad wanted to," Ethan said quietly. "But I convinced the housekeeper to let me go through things first. Told her I needed some textbooks you'd borrowed." He shrugged. "Couldn't save much, just what I could hide in here." I looked up at my brother, seeing for the first time how he'd navigated his own form of resistance within the household. Quieter than mine, but no less real. "Thank you," I said, clutching the box to my chest. "This means everything." He nodded, returning to his sorting. "I kept your graduation photo on my desk at Princeton, too. Dad hated it whenever he visited. Said it sent the wrong message about family unity." A sound from downstairs interrupted us. The front door opening, voices in the foyer. Ethan and I exchanged glances. "Mom and Dad?" I asked. He peered out the window. "Just Mom. Dad's car isn't here." We finished gathering Ethan's belongings and carried them downstairs. My mother stood in the living room, looking lost among the half-packed boxes and shrouded furniture. When she saw Ethan, something in her expression cracked open. "Ethan," she said, her voice catching. "You're really here." He set down the bags he was carrying, his posture stiff, guarded. "Hey, Mom." She stepped forward, hesitant. "You look different, stronger." 4 years in combat zones will do that," he replied, his tone not unkind but direct in a way he'd never been with our parents before. She flinched slightly. "I found your medals last night. Your letters. I don't understand why you didn't tell us." "Don't you?" Ethan's expression was steady, challenging her to see the truth. She looked down, then back up, meeting his gaze. "I do, actually. We made it impossible for you to be honest, just like we did with Victoria." She glanced at me, noticing the box in my arms. "You kept her things?" Ethan nodded. What I could. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I should have done that. I should have protected your memories, your belongings. Instead, I let him erase you from the house as if you'd never existed. The three of us stood in that half-emptied room, the weight of 6 years of separation and secrets pressing in around us. Not just the 6 years I'd been gone, but the lifetime before that, of conditional love, of performances and pretense, of a family that functioned more like a corporation with my father as CEO and the rest of us as assets with fluctuating value. Where's Dad? Ethan finally asked. At his brother's, my mother replied. He's not handling things well. The foreclosure, Victoria buying the house, discovering your military service. She twisted her wedding ring. He says I've taken your side against him, that I've betrayed the family by questioning his decisions. And have you? I asked. Taken our side? She looked around at the grand room with its high ceilings and ornate moldings, the scene of so many formal dinners and tense family confrontations. I've started to see that there should never have been sides at all. We should have been one unit, supporting each other, valuing each person's individual path. She sighed. But your father only knows hierarchies, people above him to impress, people below him to control. A truck horn sounded outside, the moving help signaling they were ready to load more items. We should finish up, Ethan said, glancing at his watch. It's almost 11. For the next hour, we worked together in a strange temporary alliance, mother, daughter, son, sorting through the remnants of a life that no longer existed. My mother moved through rooms pointing out items Ethan might want, carefully avoiding making demands or claiming anything for herself. I watched her transformation with cautious curiosity, wondering if this new humility was genuine or simply another adaptation to changed circumstances. At 11:45, the moving truck was filled with the last of their possessions. My mother stood in the front hall, glancing around at the now empty mansion. It's strange, she said softly. I thought leaving this house would destroy me. I've defined myself by this address, these rooms, for so long. She turned to face me. But standing here now, I feel lighter. As if I'm being given a chance to find out who Elizabeth Reeves actually is, without all this around her. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I'd experienced that same surprising lightness 6 years earlier, sleeping on Diana Chambers' pull-out couch, owning almost nothing but suddenly free to define myself on my own terms. What will you do now? I asked. Go to the apartment you found for us. Start over somehow. She hesitated. And try to make amends, if you'll let me. Ethan stepped forward. I'm staying with Victoria for now, while I apply to medical schools. You'll be an excellent doctor, she said, with what seemed like genuine pride. The compassion you've always had, combined with what you've learned as a medic. He nodded, accepting her words without committing to more. Outside, the security team I'd hired pulled up, right on schedule. Charles emerged from the lead car, clipboard in hand, ready to begin the formal property assessment before renovation plans could proceed. It was time to close this chapter, to transform this space from a monument to status and appearances into something with actual value to the community. As we stepped outside into the crisp fall air, I realized that the mansion behind us had never really been a home, just an elaborate stage set for the performance of family. The real work of building something authentic was only just beginning. 3. Weeks after taking possession of the mansion, I stood in what had once been the formal dining room, now stripped to the studs, reviewing blueprints with Marco, our lead architect. The renovation was proceeding faster than expected. The bones of the house were sound, despite years of cosmetic neglect, while my parents maintained appearances at the expense of actual maintenance. If we move this wall back another 2 feet, Marco suggested, pointing to the plans, We can create more natural light in both units without compromising structural integrity. I nodded, picturing the transformation of this space where I'd endured countless silent dinners, where the atmospheric pressure could change with a single disapproving glance from my father. Soon it would be someone's kitchen, practical, welcoming, designed for actual living rather than showcasing status. My phone vibrated with a text from Rebecca. Call from Richard Reeves at the office today. Wants a meeting. Says it's about the property. A familiar tension crept up my spine. Of course he wouldn't stay away. Of course he would try to regain control, to reinsert himself into the narrative. I excused myself from Marco and stepped onto what had once been the sun porch. Now, just a framed-out skeleton with promising views of the maple trees beyond. What exactly did he say? I asked when Rebecca answered my call. That he has concerns about the historical integrity of the renovations. That certain legal considerations hadn't been properly addressed. Classic Richard Reeves intimidation. Tactics. Her voice held a note of amusement. I told him any communication regarding the property needed to go through our legal department. He didn't like that. I sighed, leaning against an exposed beam. He's fishing for leverage, trying to delay the project until he can find some way to regain control. Classic narcissist playbook, Rebecca agreed. When confronted with consequences, try to rewrite the rules. She paused. How's your mother adjusting to the apartment? Surprisingly well, according to Ethan. He's been checking on her regularly. Says she's applied for a job at the university library. I still found it hard to picture Elizabeth Reeves, former queen of the country club set, working an ordinary job, living in a modest apartment. They're meeting for lunch twice a week. Baby steps. And your father? Still at his brother's place as far as we know. Still refusing to accept reality. I watched dust motes dance in the sunlight streaming through the bare window frames. Have Charles draft a formal response reminding him that Laurel Heights Investments has full legal ownership and all proper permits for the renovation. Copy the Historical Society and Zoning Board to preempt any complaints he might file there. Already done, Rebecca assured me. This isn't our first rodeo with entitled former owners. After ending the call, I rejoined Marco to finish reviewing the plans. We were discussing kitchen layouts when one of the contractors approached, looking uncomfortable. Ms. Reeves? There's someone at the gate insisting on speaking with you. An older gentleman. Says he's your father. I felt my shoulders tense. Did he say what he wants? Just that it's urgent. Family business. I glanced at Marco, who nodded understanding. Take your time. We can finish this later. Walking down the driveway toward the security gate, I took deliberate breaths, grounding myself in the present. I was no longer the teenager who trembled at my father's disapproval. I was Victoria Reeves, successful businesswoman, owner of this property, architect of my own life. My father stood on the other side of the wrought iron gate, his once commanding presence diminished by circumstances. His designer suit looked slightly rumpled, his normally perfect hair in need of a trim. When he saw me approach, he straightened, summoning the imperious demeanor that had once ruled our family. Victoria, we need to talk. I stopped a few feet from the gate, maintaining both physical and emotional distance. Hello, Father. What can I do for you? This has gone far enough, he said, gesturing toward the house. This childish revenge fantasy, this destruction of our family legacy. The renovation is proceeding according to schedule, I replied evenly. All permits are in order. There's nothing to discuss. His jaw tightened. I've spoken with several historical preservation specialists. This property has significant architectural importance to the community. Once they understand what you're planning, they already do, I interrupted. We've been working with the Historical Society from the beginning. The exterior and certain significant interior features will be preserved. The rest will be updated to provide affordable housing for 6 families. The zoning board unanimously approved our proposal. He switched tactics, his voice suddenly softer, almost reasonable. Victoria, I understand you're angry about the past, but destroying a historic home won't heal those wounds. We could discuss alternatives. Perhaps I could consult on the project, help preserve the Reeves legacy in a more appropriate way. Reeves legacy, I repeated, unable to keep a note of bitterness from my voice. Which part? The part where appearances matter more than authentic relationships? Where children are valued based on their utility to parental ambitions? Or the part where financial mismanagement leads to foreclosure? His face flushed. You have no idea the pressures I was under, the financial complexities of maintaining a property like this. I understand them perfectly, I cut in. That's why the property is being adapted to a more sustainable model. 6. Units with moderate rents will provide steady income while serving a community need. The numbers make sense in a way a single-family mansion never did. This isn't about numbers, he snapped, mask slipping. This is about you punishing me for doing what was necessary 6 years ago. I studied my father through the wrought iron bars separating us, symbolic of the barriers that had always existed between us. That's where you're wrong. This isn't about you at all. It's about creating something valuable and sustainable from something that was hollow and unsustainable. If that feels like punishment to you, perhaps you should examine why. He gripped the bars, knuckles whitening. Your mother is being unreasonable as well, talking about finding herself at her age, taking a minimum wage job shelving books, discussing divorce after 30 years of marriage. Did you put these ideas in her head too? The accusation was so typical, unable to accept that my mother might have her own thoughts, her own agency, her own capacity for growth, always looking for someone to blame, rather than examining his own role in the collapse of his carefully constructed world. Mother is an adult making her own choices, I said calmly, for perhaps the first time. She's vulnerable right now, confused. This sudden rebellion, it isn't like her. Maybe you never knew who she really was, I suggested. Maybe none of us did, including herself. His expression hardened. I came here to offer an olive branch, a chance for us to work together as a family, but I see you're determined to reject any reconciliation. Is that what this is? I gestured. Between us. Because it sounds like you're trying to reassert control over property you no longer own and people you can no longer manipulate. That's not reconciliation. That's not even close. A car pulled up behind him. A taxi, I realized. The driver rolled down his window. Mr. Reeves, your meter's running. My father straightened, adjusting his tie in a reflexive gesture of dignity. This conversation isn't over, Victoria. I've retained counsel to explore options regarding the historical designation of this property. You'll be hearing from them. I nodded, unsurprised. You have every right to pursue legal avenues. But I should warn you, our permits are in order, our plans comply with all regulations, and we've already received written support from the Historical Society. This will only cost you money you don't have. His face tightened with fury, but before he could respond, the taxi driver called out again. Sir, I've got another fare waiting. Go home, Father, I said quietly. Whatever home means for you now, this isn't yours anymore. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the frightened girl who had once desperately sought his approval. Not finding her, he finally turned and walked stiffly to the waiting taxi. I watched him drive away, feeling neither triumph nor sadness, just a calm certainty that this confrontation had been necessary, another step in the process of truly moving forward. When I returned to the house, Marco looked up from his blueprints with concern. Everything okay? Yes, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Just tying up loose ends. I pointed to the plans. Now, you were saying about moving that wall for better natural light? As we continued our discussion of the renovation, I felt something shift inside. Me, a quiet realization that my father's appearance, his threats, his attempts to regain control, all of it had left me unshaken. His power over me was truly gone. Not because I'd bought his house or succeeded financially, but because I'd finally, completely stepped out of the shadow of his expectations. The mansion would be transformed, reimagined, given new purpose. And so had I. 4 months into the renovation, snow blanketed the grounds of the former Reeves estate. What had once been an immaculately manicured showcase was now a practical construction site with temporary fencing, equipment tracks marking the pristine white surface, and the skeletal outline of new exterior staircases taking shape along the back of the building. I toured the property with the project manager, Laura, both of us bundled against the December cold as we checked the progress on each unit. Where once there had been a single grand residence designed to impress and intimidate, 6 distinct living spaces were emerging, each with its own character and purpose. Unit 1 is ahead of schedule, Laura noted, checking her tablet as we walked through what had once been the formal living room, now divided into a cozy 1-bedroom apartment with large windows overlooking the front gardens. Plumbing and electrical are complete. Drywall goes up next week. I ran my hand along a newly framed doorway. And the original moldings? Preserved and restored in the common areas, as you specified. We've got the millwork specialist coming to match sections that were damaged. She smiled. It's an interesting challenge, maintaining historical elements while creating modern, functional spaces. Much like my own life, I thought but didn't say. Preserving what was valuable from the past while building something new and healthier for the future. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Mom wants to know if you're free for dinner tomorrow. Her place. This was new, in the months since the i.e. property transfer. My relationship with my mother had evolved cautiously. Coffee meetings had progressed to occasional lunches, mostly with Ethan present as a buffer. We'd established a fragile connection based on her continued efforts to make amends and my measured willingness to listen. But dinner at her new apartment, the place that symbolized her changed circumstances, felt like crossing a significant threshold. I texted back, I'll be there, 7 p.m. Perfect, came the immediate reply. She's actually excited to cook for us. Says the kitchen is small but charmingly efficient. I smiled at the phrasing. So like my mother to find a gracious way to describe the dramatic downsizing from her gourmet kitchen with imported Italian marble to the standard apartment galley, with laminate countertops. Laura and I continued our tour, climbing the stairs to the second floor where the master suite had been transformed into 2 separate apartments. In what had once been my parents' bedroom, workers were installing energy-efficient windows that maintained the architectural style of the original house while providing better insulation and noise reduction. Ms. Reeves, one of the carpenters, approached, holding something in his hand. Found this behind the baseboard we removed. Thought you might want to see it. He handed me a tarnished silver locket, small and delicate, with an intricate floral pattern etched into its surface. I recognized it immediately. It had been mine, a 16th birthday gift from my grandmother, the only family member who had ever fully seen and accepted me. I'd thought it lost forever when I was thrown out. Thank you, I said, closing my fingers around the cool metal. This means a lot. After finishing the inspection, I sat in my car in the driveway, examining the locket more closely. The clasp was broken, but otherwise it remained intact. Inside was a tiny photo of my grandmother as a young woman, her expression serious, but with a hint of defiance in her eyes that I'd always admired. On the opposite side was a small inscription. To thine own self be true. I'd worn it constantly. As a teenager, tucking it beneath my school uniform where my father couldn't see it and disapprove of jewelry he considered sentimental and common. After my 18th birthday, in the chaotic days before being thrown out, I'd hidden it in my room, afraid it would be confiscated like other possessions deemed unnecessary when I started working more hours at the bookstore. How had it ended up behind the baseboard in my parents' bedroom? Had my mother found it and kept it secretly, a small act of rebellion she couldn't fully commit to? Or had it simply been swept there during the hasty conversion of my bedroom to a home office, lost and forgotten like so much else? The next evening, I arrived at my mother's apartment precisely at 7, a bottle of wine in one hand and the newly cleaned locket in the other. Ethan opened the door, looking relaxed in jeans and a sweater, a far cry from the formal attire our family dinners had once required. "Hey," he greeted me with a quick hug. "Fair warning, she's gone all out. Apparently she's been taking cooking classes at the community center." The apartment was small but thoughtfully arranged, with several pieces I recognized from the mansion. A side table, a reading lamp, a landscape painting that had hung in the upstairs hallway. But these familiar items were mixed with new, more modest pieces that somehow seemed more authentic, as if my mother was discovering her actual taste rather than decorating to impress others. Elizabeth Reeves emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron over a simple blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail rather than the perfect salon blowout she'd maintained for decades. "Victoria," she said, smiling with only a hint of nervousness. "Thank you for coming." "Thanks for inviting me," I replied, handing her the wine. "The place looks nice." "It's coming together," she said, glancing around. "Turns out I enjoy decorating when I'm only trying to please myself." She gestured toward the small dining table, already set with what I recognized as the everyday china, rather than the formal limoges that had intimidated childhood meals. "Dinner's almost ready. Ethan, would you open the wine?" As my brother busied himself with the bottle, I followed my mother into the compact kitchen where several pots simmered on the stove. "Nothing fancy," she said, stirring something that smelled deliciously of garlic and herbs. "Just a simple pasta dish the instructor taught us last week. Apparently I've been overcomplicating food for years." "It smells wonderful," I said, leaning against the counter. "How are the cooking classes going?" "Surprisingly enjoyable. I'm the oldest in the group by at least 20 years, but the instructor is patient." She looked up from her stirring. "I've had to learn so many basic things. Your father always insisted on having staff for anything practical." The casual mention of my father hung briefly in the air between us. In our cautious rebuilding of communication, we'd mostly avoided discussing him directly. "Have you spoken to him recently?" I asked, curious rather than anxious. She nodded, focusing on the sauce. "He calls occasionally, wants me to come back, says he's found investors for a new business venture that will restore everything we've lost." She sighed. "He still doesn't understand that what we lost wasn't just the money or the house." "And what do you tell him?" "That I'm not coming back. That I'm finding my way forward, not backward." She glanced at me. "He's filed the divorce papers, called it my final betrayal." "I'm sorry," I said automatically. She shook her head. "Don't be. It's long overdue." She turned off the burner and faced me directly. "I brought almost nothing of value from our marriage except what I learned from its failure. And you and Ethan, of course, though I nearly lost you both through my cowardice." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the locket. "I wanted to show you something. The renovation crew found this behind a baseboard in what used to be your bedroom." Her eyes widened in recognition. "Your grandmother's locket. I looked everywhere for it after—" She trailed off, unable to directly reference the day they'd thrown me out. "You looked for it?" I asked, surprised. She nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel before gently taking the necklace. "After you were gone, I went to your room, what was left of it after your father's purge. I remembered how much this meant to you. I thought maybe, someday, I could return it." She looked up, eyes glistening. "But I couldn't find it. Now I understand why." "The clasp is broken," I said, "but otherwise it's intact." She examined it carefully. "I know a jeweler who could repair this. A small place near the library where I work. Nothing fancy, but skilled craftsmanship." She hesitated. "If you'd let me, I'd like to have it fixed for you, as a small gesture." Before I could respond, Ethan called from the dining room. "Hey, is dinner supposed to be smoking like that?" My mother turned quickly back to the stove, where the pasta water was indeed boiling over. "Oh, too much heat. This electric stove is so different from the gas range I'm used to." As she adjusted burners and rescued dinner, I was struck by how different she seemed. More human, more authentic, handling a minor cooking mishap with laughter rather than the mortification such an imperfection would have once caused her. We, gathered at the small table, the three of us forming a new configuration of family. Still fragile, still healing, but genuine in a way our formal dinners at the mansion had never been. The pasta was slightly overcooked, the salad dressing a bit too tart, and yet it was perhaps the most enjoyable meal I'd ever shared with my mother and brother. "To new beginnings," Ethan proposed, raising his glass. "And to the past, properly. Honored but not repeated," my mother added, looking directly at me. I nodded, lifting my own glass. "To reclaiming what matters." As we clinked glasses, I closed my hand around my grandmother's locket, feeling its familiar weight. A piece of my past that had found its way back to me, not unlike the family connections we were cautiously rebuilding, damaged but worth preserving. Spring arrived with a gentleness that seemed to mirror the gradual healing in my own life. The renovation of the mansion was nearly complete, each of the 6 units taking on its own distinct character, while preserving elements of the historical structure. The grand staircase remained as a central feature in the common entryway, now restored to its original warmth, rather than serving as a stage for family perfectionism. The gardens had been reimagined as shared green spaces, with plots designated for residents to grow vegetables or flowers as they wished. I stood on the front lawn beside Rebecca, watching as workers installed the new sign at the entrance, Maple Grove Residences. "Not keeping the Reeves name?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," I replied. "This place deserves its own identity, not tied to the past." She nodded, understanding as always. "The applications have been pouring in. We could fill these units 3 times over." "Have the selection committee make the final decisions," I said. "Just make sure they prioritize the criteria we discussed. Single parents, essential workers, students with partial scholarships. People who needed a chance, a foundation, a place to build from. People society often overlooked or undervalued. People like I had once been." Later that afternoon, I met Ethan for coffee at the Blue Cup, which had become our regular meeting spot. He arrived in scrubs, having come directly from his hospital internship. Medical school had transformed him, not just the knowledge he was gaining, but the confidence that came from pursuing his genuine calling, rather than our father's prescribed path. "How was the overnight shift?" I asked as he slumped into the chair across from me. "Exhausting. Rewarding. I assisted on an emergency appendectomy." He sipped the coffee I'd already ordered for him. "The attending physician said my suturing technique is exceptional. Apparently all those field dressings paid off." Pride swelled in my chest. "Of course they did. You were always good with your hands. Remember those model ships you used to build?" "That, Dad thought were a waste of time," Ethan added with a wry smile. "Unless they could somehow be featured in Princeton's alumni magazine." The server brought his sandwich, and we fell into comfortable conversation about his rotations, my latest project, the book we'd both been reading. It still amazed me sometimes, this easy rapport with my brother. Growing up, we'd been positioned as competitors more than allies, my father constantly comparing our achievements, using each of us to push the other toward his definition of excellence. "Oh, I almost forgot," Ethan said, reaching into his bag. "Mom asked me to give you this." He handed me a small velvet box. Inside was my grandmother's locket, the silver polished to a soft gleam. the broken clasp replaced with one that matched the original design perfectly. She had it repaired by that jeweler she mentioned, Ethan explained. Said to tell you there's no obligation to wear it, but she wanted you to have it intact. I lifted the necklace, remembering how it had felt against my skin as a teenager, a small talisman of authenticity in a world demanding performance and perfection. That was thoughtful of her, I said, genuinely touched. She's trying, Ethan observed. Really trying. Not just with the grand gestures, but the small, daily efforts. I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. Over the past 6 months, my mother had consistently shown up, not with excuses or justifications for the past, but with genuine attempts to be present in our lives now. Coffee meetings, texts checking in, homemade soup when Ethan caught the flu. Small, sincere steps toward being the mother she had never quite managed to be when we were growing up. Have you heard anything more? From Dad? I asked, carefully clasping the locket around my neck. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. He showed up at the hospital last week, wanted to take me to lunch, talk about investment opportunities for when I finish residency. He shook his head. Still doesn't understand that I'm not interested in wealth building or status. I just want to be a good doctor. What did you tell him? That I was on duty and couldn't leave. Which was true. He sighed. But I also made it clear that I wouldn't be investing in any of his schemes even if I had the money. Which I don't. How did he take that? About as well as you'd expect. Said I was throwing away connections that could elevate my career. Suggested my military service and choice of state medical school had limited my perspective. Ethan's laugh held no humor. Same old dad, unable to see value in anything that doesn't come with prestige attached. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm sorry he can't see how amazing you are. I'm not, he replied quietly. Not anymore. I used to crave his approval like oxygen. Remember how I'd bring home those debate trophies, arrange them just so on the mantel, wait for him to notice? He shook his head. Now I realize what a waste of energy that was. He was never going to be satisfied no matter what we achieved. We fell silent for a moment, both contemplating the years spent trying to earn unconditional love that should have been freely given. In a strange way, I finally said, I'm almost grateful for how things turned out. Not for the pain or the rejection, but for the freedom that came after. If they hadn't kicked me out, I might still be trying to contort myself into someone worthy of their approval. Ethan nodded. I think about that too. If they hadn't lost everything, if the family facade hadn't crumbled so completely, I might never have found the courage to leave Princeton, to enlist, to finally choose my own path. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that our parents' worst moments had ultimately led to our greatest growth, that their rejection had forced us to build lives based on our own values rather than their expectations. Have you seen the mansion lately? I asked, changing the subject. The units are almost ready for occupancy. Mom mentioned she drove by last week, said it looks beautiful, more welcoming than it ever did as a single-family home. He hesitated. She asked if she could see inside when it's finished, before the new residents move in. The request surprised me. What do you think? Would that be too difficult for her? I think she genuinely wants to see how you've transformed it. Not out of nostalgia or regret, but admiration for what you've created. He studied my face. It might be good closure for both of you. I considered this, twisting the locket chain between my fingers. Maybe you're right. A final goodbye to what was, a proper welcome to what's next. The following weekend, I met my mother at the newly completed Maple Grove residences. She waited by her car, looking both nervous and determined in a simple sweater and slacks, so different from the formal, status-conscious woman who had once presided over this estate. Thank you for agreeing to this, she said as I approached. I wasn't sure you would. It felt right, I replied simply. The project is complete. A new chapter is beginning. We walked up the path together, past beds of spring flowers planted by the landscaping crew. The facade of the mansion remained recognizable but refreshed, cleaned stonework, new energy-efficient windows that maintained the architectural style. An entry door painted a welcoming shade of blue rather than the imposing black it had once been. "It's beautiful," my mother murmured, "so much more vibrant than before." Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. The formerly cavernous entry hall now opened to a bright common area with comfortable seating and community bulletin boards. The grand staircase remained, but was now complemented by an elevator to ensure accessibility for all residents. We toured each unit, from the one-bedroom efficiency created from what had been my father's study to the three-bedroom family apartment that had once been the formal living and dining rooms. Each space was thoughtfully designed to be both practical and pleasant, with as many original architectural details preserved as possible. In what had once been my childhood bedroom, later converted to that home office, a sunny studio apartment awaited its new tenant, a nursing student who worked nights at the university hospital. "This is where you'll live?" my mother asked, looking around the compact but well-designed space. "No," I replied, surprised by the question. "I have my condo in the city. These units are all for others." She nodded, seeming both relieved and impressed. "You've created something remarkable, Victoria. Not just physically transforming this house, but reimagining what it could be, what purpose it could serve." We ended in the back garden, sitting on a newly installed bench beneath the maple trees that had grown from saplings planted the year I was born. They were full and strong now, offering dappled shade on the spring afternoon. "I want you to know something," my mother said after a comfortable silence. "I won't ask for your forgiveness. What I did, standing by while your father threw you out, failing to protect you when you needed me most, it's not something that should be easily forgiven. Mom," she held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I've had a lot of time to reflect on where things went wrong, how I surrendered my own judgment, my own instincts, to a man who measured everything and everyone by their utility to his ambitions." She looked directly at me. "I failed you both as a mother, but I'm trying to learn from that failure, to be better now, even if it's terribly late." "It's not too late," I said gently. "Different, yes. Changed, absolutely. But not too late to build something new. Much like this house, I thought, but didn't say. Transformed, but not erased. Repurposed rather than abandoned." 6 months after the first residents moved into Maple Grove Residences, I stood on the front lawn during the community garden dedication. Families chatted excitedly about their planting plans. Children darted between newly installed benches, and elderly residents offered gardening advice from decades of experience. My mother volunteered twice weekly in the communal library we'd created from the former conservatory. She'd found unexpected joy in helping residents discover new books and building genuine connections based on shared interests rather than social status. Ethan, now in his second year of residency, had established a monthly health clinic in the community room. Watching him gently explain medical concepts to residents, I saw the compassionate physician he was becoming, so different from the corporate lawyer our father had demanded. My father remained distant, still unable to understand our choices or accept the transformation of his former symbol of status. His latest investment scheme had collapsed, leaving him further isolated. I'd left the door open for connection if he ever chose to walk through it with genuine humility, but I no longer waited for his approval or mourned its absence. The mansion. That was meant to break me had instead become my greatest achievement, not because of its financial success, though that was substantial, but because of the community it now housed. People building lives based on mutual support rather than competition, families growing together rather than performing perfection. I fingered my grandmother's locket, now a symbol not just of her wisdom, but of my own journey. To thine own self be true. words I'd finally learned to live by. My name is Victoria Reeves, and this isn't just a story about revenge or even redemption. It's about what happens when you stop measuring your worth through someone else's eyes and start building a life that reflects your own values. If my story resonates with you, please subscribe to hear more journeys of transformation and healing. Sometimes our greatest strength emerges precisely when others declare us worthless.